Welcome to this week's episode of the CPG View, the number one CPG information source for global omnichannel leaders. Mike, thank you so much for joining this week's episode of the CPG View. Been a big fan of yours for some time, and I know you and I were just talking about we had this scheduled to occur probably weeks or months ago, but schedules on both sides have prevented that, and I can just say I'm glad we both stuck with it. Before we get started, would you mind introducing yourself and the company you're with?
Yeah, my name is Mike Beckham. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Simple Modern, company that I started, I guess, almost 10 years ago, 9.5-ish years ago. And we sell a variety of products, but primarily are known for insulated drinkware.
Awesome. Well, Mike, what inspired you for the founding of Simple Modern? I believe in Oklahoma. I don't know, correct me if that's not correct. And how has it evolved since the founding, to your point, a little over 10 years ago?
I think what inspired the formation of the company was how could we leverage the skills that the co-founders and I had built in e-commerce to build a different type of company that really focused on culture and purpose as much as it did on profit. And when we started, I'd be lying if I said we had it all figured out, but I think we really did have a sense of, let's build a company that feels this way to work inside of. And then we started thinking about, okay, how would we actually do that and make that like a profitable company? What would it sell? How would it pay the bills? So one of the things that's really unique about us is that we actually didn't get to insulated drinkware as a product until a little over, 9 months into the company's history is when we sold our first water bottle. So we really were not product first. We were kind of mission first, and then we got to product. We started the company in Oklahoma. We have an in-person work environment. Many e-commerce companies now are remote in nature. And again, this flows from, we had a real emphasis on culture and a particular point of view that a culture where you really know your coworkers and that you have depth of relationship can be a competitive advantage. But more than that, it can be the type of company that you want to work in. And I think if there's one thing that we've been really successful with in the kind of building of Simple Modern is that we've created a company that's really enjoyable to be a part of. I read something that the CEO of Netflix wrote about his history. And if you look at his history, he actually started a company before Netflix that went public. And he woke up one day, a little bit after it had gone public, and kind of looked around and realized, I don't like working here. And unfortunately, this happens to entrepreneurs quite a bit. We get so focused about whether or not we can build the thing. Can we make it profitable? Can we make it grow? And then we look up one day and we're like, I don't know that I actually really like it here, and what this thing has turned into. And I think because we started with an idea of what we wanted it to feel like to be a part of the company and what we wanted the impact of the company to be, we were able to be really intentional about how we grew it. Now, we've been really fortunate that the company's grown very rapidly, and the way that we've managed that growth, I think, has stayed really true to the spirit of what we wanted it to be. And so as a result, as we're getting close to 10 years in and a couple $100 million in annual revenue, it's just really enjoyable to go to work every day. And I enjoy the people that I work with. We have a real sense of community. The company has a real tie to the local community. We make a lot of impact through our giving. And it's more than just challenging or financially rewarding. It also feels like, hey, this is part of my personal mission of being part of the company. So I think most people, when they talk to me about the company, it's the thing that's the most interesting about it, is that we've just been I would say, abnormally intentional about the design and the culture of what we've built.
Yeah, it's very interesting. There's a couple of things I've, from my vantage point, I would say I'm pretty lucky. I'm a nerd for sure. One, I study leadership for two, and I'd say third, I have an opportunity to meet really smart, fantastic people and my kind of journey and the hobbies that I'm involved with. This podcast is one of those. And a lot of what you're saying really resonates. I can think about, there's the company that I joined maybe a little over a year ago. The name of its Pattern, very similar to what you just described. Brian is also another one I think of. Ibotta, the CEO of Ibotta, they just went public, I think, 6+ months ago. Very similar to what you're describing. I think it's interesting how many of these really successful companies, not to say that you couldn't do it this way, but it is interesting that a lot of the successful companies do start mission, vision, values first,
Yeah.
and then they bolt on product market fit, what the objectives are, what our goals are, what the measures are, what our plans are going to be, what's our go-to-market motion. I've seen very few highly successful organizations, and specifically entrepreneurs that now run those organizations, where it's not mission and vision first. So
I think
really,
there's a really clear reason for that, I think, which is in business, your team's performance is usually just a function of the caliber of person that you have on the team and the chemistry that they developed working together over time. And if that's the case, your ability to recruit exceptional people, your ability to keep them in the organization for extended periods of time where they can become really experts at what they do and develop chemistry with one another and working with one another. One of my favorite analogies here is the Golden State Warriors. Part of what made them so great was Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Stephen Curry, all were on that team for like a decade. And the chemistry they developed of having worked together, they were all getting better individually, but they got better as a group. And great teams do this. When you have a really strong sense of mission and culture, you're creating an environment that becomes a magnet for people that are passionate about that. And then people tend to want to stay. And it turns out that in the game of business, that's probably the most significant thing you can do. If you create an environment that great players want to be a part of, and then when they get there, they don't leave, it actually becomes hard to fail. And if you don't hang on to great performers, then even when you have periods of success, it's almost impossible to sustain them. So the way I would say it is when you have a clear magnet of this is why we exist, this is what we're passionate about, then it can't help but attract talented people that share those perspectives, and it tends to retain them. And when you don't have that magnet, it inevitably you lose the core, and inevitably you can't sustain success. So I don't think it's coincidental at all.
yeah,
And usually when you look at the iconic companies that lose their way, what you see is that they had a really strong sense of mission and purpose for a period. And then when they went away from that, they lost the thing that made them special for so long.
yeah, totally agree. Well, I want to switch gears here and maybe go to a little less on that topic and more on actually the product topic.
Yeah.
Can you share a little color, maybe some insights into the unique styles and maybe designs that set Simple Modern products apart in the market today?
Yeah, I think that a couple of things that have always defined us, we've felt like the brand lives at the intersection of style and quality and affordable prices, and I would say mobility. Maybe you could take those four things and say we live kind of at the juncture of those four roads, and that's really what the customer is looking for. And it's built a tremendous amount of brand equity for us that people know when they buy a Simple Modern product, it's going to be great and it's going to be on trend. It's going to have trendy colors or designs, and it can go with me, which I think in a post-COVID world, this is more important than ever before. Like we're a lot of people have responded to the immobility of 2020 and 2021 with we want to move around a lot. And we try and do it at affordable prices. We have a company value of generosity. And one of the ways that we express that is not asking, hey, what's the maximum we can charge for our products, but how do we leave customers with the experience where they feel like, wow, I paid $30, but I would have paid 70 for that. And when you do that, you have really, really satisfied customers that come back time and again.
Love that. And I think it does say something too, in terms of, I'm sure the category you're in has gotten significantly more crowded, I would imagine, in the last several years, and you all's ability to continue to differentiate, innovate. Very interesting. And I wanted to actually mention that in our next point here. I think you and I both have been probably, I'm going to say I'm a nerd here. You're probably better than a nerd, but both we've been around e-commerce for a while and we believe in it. So what ways do you believe e-commerce, or what do you think e-commerce can continue? How will that continue to evolve? And how will you all, or how are you thinking about how you leverage e-commerce to better serve customers and, to your point, the communities in the future?
So I think one of the things that became really evident during COVID, there was this period where e-commerce had been growing at a good clip. And then many of us have seen the chart where the growth goes almost vertical during the COVID lockdowns. And there was this kind of like, is this it? Is this the watershed moment where everything goes digital? And it turns out that no, several years later, we actually have an answer to that question, that if you watch the graph since then, it kind of flatlined for a while. And now if you had graphed out where e-commerce penetration was in 2019 and made a guess about where it would be in 2024, you would get about where it is today. So I think the first learning there is that e-commerce is not the cure-all and it's not taking over everything, but that the mixture of digital and physical is the future of how people are going to shop. And it's going to be in some really interesting ways. You see different retailers using that in different methods. But so I think the first thing you can say about e-commerce is that part of e-commerce is actually supplementing what's going on in the physical world. You're going to see it used that way. I think another advantage of e-commerce is it's a great information gathering tool. So if I want to do research, if I want to read 50 reviews about something, I can't do that if I'm in a Walmart aisle, but I can do that if I'm on Walmart's website, for example. So it's great for information gathering. Another thing it's great for is it's great for diversity. Physical retail has the limitations of a limited shelf space. Digital retail doesn't have that. It has kind of an infinite shelf. So for us, we're in a category where style is important and ornamentation is important. Digital offers us the opportunity to bring things to market where maybe there's 5,000 of our customers that really want it. And if there's only 5,000 of our customers that really want it, two things are simultaneously true. It's material economically. I mean, we could make a good amount of money, a contribution profit by selling that thing, and our customers would be delighted. But we can't justify putting that on a shelf in a Target, for example. So there's an opportunity to take advantage of demand that really can't be accessed if you're just kind of doing the down the middle options that mass retail necessitates. So the smart people, an example in our industry that we were kind of part of pioneering that I think now everybody is doing is using drops, limited drops that delight customers. So there's some things like that. I think another thing about e-commerce that's particularly helpful is that you can establish more of a relationship with the customer. When you're in physical retail, it's harder to do that. It's hard to get feedback from the customer. It's hard to communicate with them digitally. You can do a lot of that. The smartest companies, in my opinion, are all going omni-channel. They're all saying, I can't serve 100% of my customers' needs usually just by being digital. And I can't serve 100% of their needs by being physical. But if I'm thoughtful about how I mix these two, I can give customers the most diversity of choice and the best experience. And I think that that's how we've been able to use digital at Simple Modern.
I think that's great, and I think about a couple things you said there with regards to, if you only play it down the middle, you're in many cases not going to, I mean, you're playing, not you, but anyone who does play it down the middle is playing it safe, appeasing to the masses, as opposed to, I would imagine you guys have carved out this wonderful niche of hitting it down the middle with innovation and design, but also serving customers, delighting customers with, to your point, drops, as well as the capability or ability to serve those customers' needs via online. So that makes tremendous sense, and I agree with much of what you just said. I wanted to ask you a question here on innovation, and more specifically, what role does innovation play in the ongoing success of Simple Modern? It feels like you all have continued to have this momentum in market as a leader in the drinkware and consumer goods industry.
Yeah. So I think that innovation, that word really I would substitute for freshness. Like innovation doesn't necessarily I'm saying I'm doing this totally new and unique thing that's never been done before. I've reinvented the wheel. But it does mean that I'm keeping things fresh and I'm giving customers new opportunities to be delighted, and that I'm constantly asking, how can my products evolve? And so sometimes that literally is like, hey, it can do this thing that it couldn't do before. And sometimes it can do the same thing in just a different way that's fun and novel and bespoke. And so we do a lot of investment in innovation. And frankly, we think we can continue to get a lot better. We've been having a lot of internal discussions of how do we continue to get better. And this is a company, as a company, we have several thousand SKUs, which obviously requires a lot of innovation. But I think the general principle is to innovate effectively, you just have to talk to customers a lot. And you have to really understand the way they see the world and their felt needs, and then the needs that they have that they might not even be able to verbalize or put their finger on, but that they kind of can, kind of point generally to, and then say, "Hey, how do we do that?" On the, I think, kind of fashion ornamentation side, that's easier. It's just like we're constantly saying, what colors are next? What different ways can we kind of ornament or print on this bottle, or use style on this bottle? But we do a lot with our lids and playing with. I mean, it's funny because people have drank out of cups for just about all of human history, and there's only a few ways you can kind of drink out of something, but there's a bunch of different ways that you can deliver that experience to the customer, and some are way more enjoyable, way more pleasing. A lot of the innovation, I think, in our industry has been around how do we make things that really are mobile, where it gives a great drinking experience, but it also can be very leak proof when you want it to be, when you want to throw it in your bag. So we're constantly engaged in it. Also, we're in a, I would say, a fashion like industry where preferences are just going to change a lot, and not necessarily preferences around, I need this new feature that I didn't have before, but just how many ounces of water do I want to be carrying with me, and how do I want to actually drink it, and what do I want it to look like? And so we have to be constantly coming up with new ideas and disrupting ourselves and talking to customers, or you're going to feel pretty stale pretty quick, is what we've learned.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many of the things you just said there. I'll keep this one short. So I want to make sure we get our last question here because I think, is probably near and dear to you. But on that point you just made, we've had so many guests since we started the podcast, and they talk about, many of them on the brand side or entrepreneurs, um, how important it is to stay so close to the consumer and put the consumer at the center of it all. And I would say, without saying any names, there's companies that say that, and then there's companies that do that. And you can typically see the difference pretty apparently. And I would say, having been a fan of you all's brand for some time, it feels like you all are staying quite close to the consumer. I used to work at a CPG brand for a decade and a half, and we were constantly talking to consumers around their interest in our products, whether it was pens in the pencil category, or whether it was the adhesives or glue category, or whether it was how they were cooking in the crock pot and Calphalon pans that we were manufacturing and selling. So it feels like you all are definitely on the right track there. 100 million or several hundred million and counting. So awesome to see. I wanted to close out with you on this last question. Can you discuss any upcoming initiatives or projects that you have in mind that you're excited about from a Simple Modern perspective, that could positively impact the community, and at the same time maybe expand some product lines along the way?
Yeah, so we are going to try something I think that's very innovative and different. And I'll give a couple principles that we've learned, which are, if you're going to do something new product wise, you should ask yourself the question, can it be life changing if it works? We've definitely made the mistake of sometimes doing things because they were kind of interesting or kind of cool, but they couldn't really move the business. And in general, that's a waste of organizational inertia. But also, you have to ask yourself the question, do we have the information to believe that this can be successful? Not just that it would be really big if it were successful, but do we believe it can be successful? And, what is the data? What is the qualitative information that we would point to that makes us believe that? We have my friend Taylor Holiday likes to say that you should not launch into e-commerce right now unless you have some kind of unique competitive advantage that's going to help allow you to be successful. And I think that that's true. I think it's very difficult to just launch into e-commerce unless you're like, I have a unique angle to better customer acquisition costs or, whatever. And in this particular case, we feel like we have a unique competitive advantage that's simply a result of building Simple Modern for 10 years that we can leverage in a way that nobody's done yet and get into a product category that's very promising as a product category. So without getting all the way into it, I think if somebody listens to this in 6 months, they might be like, oh, it's really obvious now what they were thinking. But I do think those are the principles that we're trying to stack on top of each other. What are our unique competitive advantages? What are some ways we could use the unique competitive advantages that, if it worked, really did change our life? And then finally, do we have data points that says there's at least a decent chance that this is successful? And if so, you should take that swing. And then you should be okay if some of those swings are strikeouts, because they're going to be. When you go after asymmetric things, naturally, you're just going to have strikeouts along the way. But if you take enough high quality swings, you're going to sit down, you're going to go back to the dugout at some point and say, I hit 10 out of the park, over 100 pitches or over 50 pitches. And that's really what consumer is. It's interesting because you don't really get penalized that badly in consumer for launching something that customers don't love, but you get so handsomely rewarded for launching something that customers gravitate towards that there's a lot of incentive to continue to launch things. We're just trying to get better and better at choosing what are the arrows that we put all our wood behind.
I love that. So much goodness there. Not enough time to unpack that. Well, I can't wait to see what this innovation is. To your point, this likely will launch probably a couple months after you and I have recorded this. So I'll be on a close lookout. I did want to, Mike, thank you so much for joining this week's episode of the CPG View. Is there anything I wanted to ask you that you'd like to leave the audience with in closing?
No, you can follow me. There's 2 or 3 things I do in addition to this podcast as a guest. I'm part of the Operators Podcast, where we talk about a bunch of these issues. And you can also follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Don.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the CPG View, the #1 CPG information source for global omni-channel leaders.